Our next speaker is Victor Figueroa Clark. Victor is a Chilean-British researcher and author. He's based in London and teaches at the LSE. He's contributing editor of the website Alborada. His first book was about Salvador Allende, Revolutionary Democrat, which was published in 2013. And in addition to his research on Latin America, we should know that Victor went to school for many years in the Soviet Union in the late 1980s and speaks fluent Russian. And he has been following events in the Ukraine very closely. So Victor, we are all agog to hear from you.
Thank you, Radhika. I should note that I no longer teach at the LSE. But I did do for a time Cold War history, Russian history, Latin American history, and that I guess is the main perspective from which I'm approaching this situation. I think the level of hysteria in the West and the complexity of the issues that we've been discussing here today reflect the historic nature of this conflict and the importance it has for the future of the world. And I think there are many Russian specialists at the moment who are describing this as an epochal moment, the end of the Yalta system of international relations and the beginning of the establishment of a new system in international relations. I think, broadly speaking, there are four general keys which help us to understand the situation today, and we've been discussing them, or the speakers that have spoken so far have been discussing them. The first is the nature and the character of the international system. The second is the character of the Ukrainian state and the history of Ukrainian nationalism. The third is the nature of the Russian state and its security interests. And I think the last category is really the history of the relationship between the United States and NATO and Russia over the last 20 years, fundamentally. And I think a lot has been said so far. I would just note that unlike one of the previous speakers, I think that we can only really speak at global level of one imperialism, and it's the imperialism of a global financial system. And there may be efforts to resist this system, but they don't necessarily reflect what I would consider to be a global imperialism. And I think that the international system is characterized by an imperialist situation. But within this, I think we need to bear in mind that there is an imperial core, which we could see as being centered around the United States and the Anglo-speaking countries, Canada, Britain, and so on. An outer core consisting of the Western European states and some states in the Asia-Pacific region, and a periphery, an exploited periphery, which are subject to this system, but are not really beneficiaries of it in any meaningful sense. And within this system, we know that the United States plays the role of the main beneficiary. It's also the main guarantor and the main executor that defends this system. And I think that it's important to note that this system is under challenge, and it has been since 2008. Internally, there's been an ideological crisis, the collapse of neoliberalism, for example. There's an economic crisis which I think has been more evident since COVID-19 struck. And I think that this crisis is reflected in the system's increased use of violence and coercion in order to police the periphery and, let's face it, loot it. You know, the billions that have been stolen from the people of Libya, the people of Venezuela, are testament to the parasitic nature of this imperial system. But the fact that it's under challenge is really important for looking at the situation in Ukraine, because it explains, I think, why the United States is so hostile to Russia, because Russia is one of two what we might call contender states, which are challenging this US hegemony and this imperial system that the United States built after the Second World War. And I think if we, to speed through this, if we look at what purpose the Ukraine crisis serves, It is fundamentally to weaken China, as John was saying before, in order to later or simultaneously also weaken China. It is to tear Russia and the European Union apart so as to be able to control the European Union more effectively, fundamentally through Germany. Nevertheless, I think the fact that Russia was forced to invade the Ukraine is a severe political defeat for Russia, at least in the short term. Much will depend on what happens in Ukraine in coming years. But at the moment, Russia is suffering from a lot, from a defeat, at least in the second area that I thought I could contribute to is assessing the nature of the Ukrainian state. In my research on Latin America, I spent a lot of time trying to work out what perhaps what fascism looked like in the 21st century. And I think that Ukraine, in one way or another, forms a case study for the most developed form of 21st century fascism that we see in the world today. And when I talk to some leftists in the UK about this, they often sort of say that, well, Ukraine is a democracy, really. Yeah, there are fascists there, but show me a country that doesn't have any fascists in it. Others seem to think that fascism is a historic phenomenon. It's from the 1930s, it's jackboots and so on. But I think if we look at the theory, we know that fascism is evident in its class content and in the means it uses in order to achieve its class goals. And when we look at Ukraine from that perspective, I think we can see the fascistic nature, or at least the hegemony of fascistic discourse in Ukraine and in the domination of the Ukrainian state, which made a diplomatic solution to this crisis very, very unlikely, if not impossible. So the first thing I would say here is that, neo-Nazis played a key role in the overthrow of the previous Ukrainian government under Yanukovych in 2014. It was a violent overthrow. Over 30 police were killed by snipers and by gunfire during that period. Neo-Nazis occupied state buildings, they occupied regional parliaments, they smashed up the offices of opposing political parties, and they generally intimidated the police and those who opposed the Maidan. So they were able, in that moment, to guarantee the overthrow of the Yanukovych regime, which gave them a privileged position in the post-Yanukovych, in the post-Maidan Ukrainian state. I think that we can see the fascistic nature of the regime also in the socioeconomic policies that it's carried out, which have harmed the Ukrainian working class. I think it was in 2021, the Ptucha Institute in Kiev of the Ukrainian Academy of Sciences estimated that over 50% of Ukrainians now lived in absolute poverty. And if you look at the socioeconomic indicators across the board, there's been a decline since 2014. We can see this in the neoliberal policies of privatizations, which have benefited local oligarchs, but also the international financial system through Ukraine's indebtedness now to the IMF to the tune of several billions, and the opening of the economy to transnational corporations, which have all been why there's been such a severe socioeconomic impact on the Ukrainian people. In politics, we can see it through the banning of the Communist Party, the coercion and intimidation and violence that has been used to intimidate the Russian-speaking population, but also the organizations of a potential political opposition since 2014. And I think fascism is often said to have a purpose, a specific purpose, which is a counter-revolutionary purpose to prevent a popular alternative from arising. And I think if we look at Ukraine as a post-Soviet state, a state in which in 2013, about a third of the population wanted to return to a planned economy, a state in which inclusion into the Russian sphere of influence fortifies, strengthens the role that Russia has as a contender state against US Western imperialism, means that fascism plays an important role within Ukraine. as a counter-revolutionary project. When we look at Ukrainian society, I think it's very clear to see how the far right has been able to hegemonize discourse on history, on current affairs, on culture and language. I'm going to be finishing up. In culture, it's clear that there's a necrophiliac tendency to Ukrainian culture. Just in the Eurovision, was it last year or the year before? The singer appeared as an angel of death on a burning background of, burning trees, and it was a pretty grim picture. But I think this is part of a fetishization of death and of Nazi symbolisms and so on. And so the point here is that Ukrainian fascism doesn't exercise its domination in electoral forms. It's not reflected in parliament. It's reflected in their presence in the state institutions, their domination of the coercive institutions of the state, the military, the intelligence services, and the police. It's in their domination of national narratives and their ability to dominate how the state educates its people. And it's in their effective veto over government policy against peace. So, for example, just this weekend, one of the Ukrainian negotiators with Russia has been assassinated in Kiev. And, I think that is a clear indication of the incapacity of the Russian state to actually make a diplomatic solution. So I think there are other points. I'm sorry if I've run on, but I think that it's very important to be able to understand this character of the Ukrainian state and of Ukrainian fascism to be able to understand what's happening now. Thank you.
I'm Michael Hudson. I'm appearing here for the International Manifesto Group. If you like this video and ones like it, please subscribe. For more information, go to the address on this screen.